Hello, welcome to the stream. I'm Mike, and you should be seeing. I'm just going to make a last little tweak here. You're getting a tiny bit of my desktop that I don't want you to get. Okay, so today we're talking about game design. I had an idea yesterday, maybe Monday. Time is a flat circle. I was thinking about beats, and I'd been thinking about beats as in Heart, the City Beneath, off and on for a while. And then I guess this was mostly yesterday. The Quinn's Quest review for Slugblaster came out. And in that review, Quinn's talks about the beats system that Slugblaster has and spoke very positively of it. And so after watching some of that and kind of thinking about or pulling out things that I'd already been thinking about, decided to take down some notes about a new game idea. Hello, Actual Factual. So the idea here is that there are a lot of superhero TTRPGs. There are a ton of superhero TTRPGs. Most of them don't appeal to me anymore. And that's not because they aren't good at what they're trying to do. It's more that the things that I connect with really intensely in superhero stories, I find it hard to excitingly represent in most TTRPGs about superheroes. That being the way that superheroes are a serial and episodic kind of run-based, as in like this artist and this writer's run on a comic, and the way that superheroes have become modern mythology to the degree of being folk cycles, right? Where there is the idea of Batman, the idea of Superman, but then there's an intense plurality of interpretations, and the relationship to canon and canonicity is really fluid, and that these are characters who grow and change, but unevenly and not necessarily permanently, so that there is a lot of flexibility, but also incoherence for a lot of superhero characters in a way that I think can be really fun and interesting. And so the idea that we have in kind of my pitch to myself, which is a way that I think when I'm doing, when I'm building out ideas, whether that is for fiction or games or anything, is that I come up with a pitch to myself. It looks like my video is messed up again. Interesting. Okay, so we're going to go just with audio. Hello, the kids are asleep. Yes, my video did freeze, so we're just going to continue with me as a ghostly voice talking about games. So I write pitches for myself about this is the thing that I'm trying to hit, or these are some vibes that I want to capture and try to create. And so, right, we have the header Super's Duality Dice game theme. So one thing I've given away immediately is that I'm thinking about this in terms of the Duality Dice system of Daggerheart, right? The fact that there is going to be a creator license has already been announced. The degree to which that license operates is not something I can talk about, but for this stream, I'm pretending as if the Daggerheart Duality Dice system will be something like Forged in the Dark, where you can just make your own games. If that turns out to be not true, I'll do something else. That's fine. But I'd already been thinking about what else could I do with the Duality Dice system and what opportunities does it offer. And here I'm mostly thinking about the idea that we have two D12s, you roll them and then add or subtract a small number, and that you look at both your total in terms of the numerical sum or like the result of the 2 dice and your modifier, and you look at which die is higher. And that by doing those systems, you can create 5 different result states. That being you can hit the number and the hope die can be higher. You can hit the number and the fear die can be higher. You can fail to hit the number and the hope die is higher. And then you can fail to hit the number and the fear die is higher. And then the 5th result is the numbers come up the same. So by rolling 2 dice, you can get 5 possible results. And that's really interesting and creates it creates a lot of granularity in your possible results, and that there is a lot that can be done with that. If we look at Powered by the Apocalypse games, all of those moves, with some rare exceptions like advanced moves, the results have 3 bands, right? There is 6 minus, 7 to 9, and 10 plus is the default Powered by the Apocalypse result bands. And by rolling 2d6 and adding or subtracting a number, you get 3 bands of results. You can go up to 4 bands of results if 12 plus is some kind of special or critical. And then there are other PBTA games that muck with this in cool and interesting ways. But for Duality Dice, if we keep this core dice engine, and for now I'm going to leave aside stress and hit points and experience and a lot of the other things and boil it down to just this 2d12. So I'm thinking about that structure. And I've been thinking a lot about beats, story beats. And so here we're going to go to another page, and then I'm going to remove this video as well. So here I've got the PDFs for Heart, the City Beneath, and the PDF for Slugblaster, Kickflip Over, Quantum Centipede. These games both have beats. They are different kinds of beats. And I'll talk through the core of the idea first, and then we'll go and look at a couple of pages to have some reference for what I'm thinking about here. Superhero stories, one of the things that gets leveled against them as a complaint is that they're formulaic. But what if that was the upside? What if the fact that there are formula and tale types in superhero stories, what if that was an upside? What if that was some of the game that you're playing is playing into and playing against these story structures? Mike, you might say, this is just genre knots. And the thing I would say to you on that is there's a degree to which everything I do is just genre knots, because genre knots is, to a large extent, just a way of looking how storytelling works. Yes, the kids are asleep says, lol, I was going to say this has Mike written all over it. So a game that I'm very fond of in superheroes, and I don't have the camera up anymore, so I'm just going to talk about it, is Masks: A New Generation. Masks has a very specific focus of the type of stories it's trying to tell. It is trying to tell stories about adolescent superheroes working in a team who are still trying to figure out who they are as people, and where their emotional state is really central to the storytelling, right? You have your labels instead of stats, and you have emotional conditions instead of hit points, right? So this is a game about how you see yourself. It is a game about identity. It is a game about growing up. It is a game about wrestling with your emotions, and that your emotional landscape is a really important part of the story. Masks gets a lot of praise for, I think, very good reasons, but it doesn't, there's a lot of people who play superhero TTRPGs who are not necessarily looking for that type of experience with superheroes as genre, a super genre, a mode, however it is that we want to talk about, right? Is superheroes a genre, or is it something bigger / smaller, is a conversation that I return to repeatedly, but I'm going to mostly leave to the side for today because it is big enough to be its own whole separate thing. If we treat story structure as not something that is the result of, or is an an output of superhero storytelling, but we make it visible and we treat it as a member of the storytelling team, right? The structure is in play and we are playing with it and against it. Then we have a different relationship to superheroes as a genre, right? The thing I want from making a superheroes game is I want a superheroes game that has a point of view and that is easy to read for a potential player as this is what this game has to say about superheroes, and this is why you might pick this game instead of 50 other superhero TTRPGs. I have played a lot of superhero TTRPGs because I like superheroes as a set of characters and as a storytelling tradition. A lot of superhero TTRPGs focus on pretty granular and or tactical combat, and a lot of granularity and specificity in how superpowers work. I'm not going to do that. What I'm looking at is a game that is at most as crunchy and tactical as Daggerheart, and it probably lands somewhere closer to a middle point between Daggerheart and Masks: A New Generation. So in terms of mechanical structure, I'm thinking Daggerheart and I'm thinking Masks. So Masks is one of the most famous Powered by the Apocalypse games. Daggerheart draws from Powered by the Apocalypse, but is developed to the point of being its own system. And it also, right, is borrowing from Genesis and Cortex and a couple of other traditions because it's a lot of things together and then pushed in a new direction. The other core elements that I'm bringing to the table are ideas of beats, and beats as not just something that emerge from play, but are a tool in play, right? So in Heart, the City Beneath, I'm going to scroll down here, and then we're going to go to callings, right? So in your calling, nope, that's not callings. So callings have beats, right? If we look at this page here, what beats are for adventure, right? Your character is in the game of Heart because they want to go on an adventure. Minor beats, major beats, zenith beats. I'll explain the beats system real quick. All right, I'm just going to go back over here to me so that there's not as much text to distract you. In Heart, you are expecting to play a pretty short story, right? Most Heart campaigns anecdotally finish in 6, 8, 10, or 12 sessions, right? We're not talking about a 100+ session campaign. We're not even talking about 20 to 30 something. It's been my experience that like a Forge in the Dark campaign will often wrap up somewhere in the 20s in terms of session numbers. Heart, you're probably going to go not that many. When you build your character, you select a calling, which is why they are going down into the Heart, right? Is it for adventure? Is it because they are drawn by something in the Heart itself? Is it that they have been forced to do so? Is it that they are trying to answer some kind of question? They're exploring and trying to discover something, right? You select your calling, and then the way that you advance in Heart is that you select beats, right? At the end of a session, you pick 2 beats that you are hoping to potentially hit in the next session. And here I'm going to go back so we can look at them more specifically. If we have 4 players and they each have 2 beats, right? That's 8 beats. That means that for any given session, the GM has 8 plot beats that they can stitch a plot together from. Ideally, you get the chance to hit every beat for every player in a given session. That's not always going to happen, But the guidance and the advice that I've seen and heard from people running Heart is that you want to treat these beats as a pretty core element of your prep. Right? So if we have an adventure, if we have characters, say everybody is here for adventure, because then we only have to look at one page, right? So our beats can be minor, major, or zenith. When you complete a minor beat, you get a minor level ability, the lowest level. When you hit a major beat, you get a major ability, a bigger one. And if you complete a zenith beat, you get a zenith move, which is the most powerful move. Most of the time, you can use a zenith move once, and then your character is going to be out of the campaign. So everybody is building toward these zenith beats. And the zenith beats represent kind of the culmination of that type of a story. For a character who is in the heart because they are seeking adventure, what is going to be the climax of their story, right? It's going to be reaching the most dangerous, deepest part of the heart, tier 4, or it might be to lead a haven, right? A settlement within the realm of the heart, to lead a settlement to prosperity, right? Adventurer as the hero of a place. But you're going to need probably powers to be able to do either of these things. And so you take beats along the way, right? Most of the time, a character at the start of a Heart campaign will have 2 minor beats, or maybe a minor beat and a major beat. Minor beats can be fulfilled most easily. Major beats are harder or take longer. And then zenith beats are hardest and or take the longest. So if we've got a bunch of adventure here, right? Charm someone with tales of your exploits. Engage in reckless abandon with drinks, drugs, and sex. Or sex. Slay a beast that drops resources of D10 or higher, right? That's big resource. Access a haven in tier 2 of the heart. Oh, okay, well, haven and tier 2, right? Those connect to this thing, right? We've got some structure that we're seeing already in how these beats fit together. The beats in a calling are written to all go together. They are also presenting a menu for how to build a character's story. And again, these beats are selected by the players. The player says, I want a chance to help an important or influential figure in a haven. I want to kick someone off a tall structure who really deserved it. Beats are flags to the GM, right? You can flag the kind of experience that you want for your character and for you as a player by picking these beats. Beats are explicitly invoked when the player is asking for them, right? The player will say, I want to establish a connection between places, and I want to rescue someone from peril. The GM then has clear wishes, right? If we're using stars and wishes, a clear wish, a request from the player, hey, I want to see this in the game for my character. You take a bunch of beats, and then you figure out how you might be able to create a scenario or a set of scenarios that will fulfill those beats. A fun meta thing in Heart is that one of the ways of interpreting Heart is that it is a place itself that is trying to give you what you want. To a degree, the heart is reflecting what a game master is doing when the game master is trying to give you the kind of story, the kind of experience that you as a player want. The heart wants to give these people who are delving into the heart the things that they are looking for, right? And so having these callings works really well, both from the perspective of this is an improv-driven game where the plot is about these player characters more than or more frequently than some plot or place that is off elsewhere and does not relate to these characters, right? The story is going to be about the characters. Similarly, Daggerheart is largely built to be about those characters because of the background questions and the connection questions and the other GM advice, right? And this is already in the extant version. I'm not spoiling anything here. So these beats are a way of flagging to the GM, here's the kind of story that I want. you pick your calling as a player for your character to help you figure out and to help you accomplish the type of story you want to tell with this character. Most characters in Heart do not come to a good ends, right? It is often a very tragic game. So that is how beats and theme relate in Heart of City Beneath, right? If we jump over to Slugblaster, there's at least two types of beats in Slugblaster. There are kind of downtime, anything goes beats, right? These beats here, trait beats, you can say, okay, it's downtime. I'm going to spend 3 of my style resource, which is a resource I want to get. I can use style to buy a trait. So, okay, origin story. I'm going to do a flashback that shows a defining moment from my past, and then I get to pick a trait, a special ability that reflects either the thing that I learned or a development of some action that I took in this flashback. Or you might buy the beat Sharpened. A teammate inspires you or shows you something about yourself, right? This requires another teammate being involved, right? So you're buying scenes and then using them to help you tell the story of who this person is and to tell the story of the group together. You might decide that you want a family arc for your player character. And so after you go on a mission and have a wild adventure in this quantum multiverse that you do in Slugblaster, you go, okay, I want to start the family arc, so I'm going to buy the Trouble at Home beat from the family arc. Your family disapproves. How, why do you care? Instead of spending style to do this, you actually get to buy off a negative resource called Trouble. Down beats or negative beats or beats that add challenge or create problems in Slugblaster, you tend to buy in a way that lets you remove trouble. You can go, oh, I'm going to spend 2 trouble to take Trouble at Home. And then these prompts for the beats are really flexible, right? A family arc is about being understood by your family or having a better relationship with your family. Slugblasting, this interdimensional travel and adventure, is, as a rule, looked down on and not understood by a character's broader family, especially by grown-ups, right? Guardians, parents, so on. So you kick off the family arc by establishing that your family disapproves of what you're doing, of who you are, right? If you wanted to play through a story of a character trying to be accepted by their family for being a Slugblaster, and then maybe it's also trying to be accepted by their family for being queer, right? You can align the Slugblasting and the kind of homophobia elements so that they are resonating with one another, or you can just do one at a time, right? Trouble at Home is not automatically about them disapproving of you being a Slugblaster. It's not automatically about them disapproving who you're dating or of your gender or sexual identity. But it can be, right? This family arc structure, Trouble at Home, Final Warning, Last Straw, right? Last Straw is the last straw has been consumed or been used, right? Things go really, really bad. And then Redemption. So there is signaling of the threat. There is escalation. You get your final warning. You've gone too far. You get grounded. They take away a cool device that you have, something like that, right? These are the consequences listed. And then +1 Doom. Doom is like a end of campaign resource you don't want to have. The more Doom your group, your character has and your group has at the end of the campaign, the more likely you are to come to a bad end in the long term. But eventually you can get to Redemption. And when you get Redemption, you reduce Doom by 2, right? So that's a net 0 of Doom because you get +1 here and +1 there. But you get +1 legacy or trait. Legacy is a long-term resource that you want to have so that your group is well remembered and beloved. But this kind of scaling up and down of doom is also a representative of kind of the escalation and resolution or relief of narrative dramatic tension over the course of this arc, right? You might buy one beat in your family arc between each mission that you go on, but there's family arc, there's angst arc, there are crew beats. These you don't necessarily have to, yes, these you are going to hit in order. I'm sorry, right? There's a new opportunity. Here's a challenge. There's a fight within the group, right? Maybe the group breaks up, maybe they don't, and then everybody makes up, and that fracture goes away. Fracture is something you don't want, right? By buying these beats, you are able to access upgrades and advancement, right? It's the way you get advancement in Slugblaster. And by buying negative beats, right, you can buy off this trouble resource that you don't want to have. The other thing I want to hit, so I'm just going to jump back here real quick and then zip along to the playbooks so that I'm not just showing more of the game and I'm not trying to cycle through the whole book for too long. Oh, it looks like something maybe is wrong in this PDF because I'm not able to see all of the playbooks. Interesting. Yeah, something is not showing up in this PDF. Okay, so I'll just describe them. Sorry. You should buy Slugblaster. It's really cool. It has some of the best graphic design and visual identity of an RPG that I've read in years. There was just a review on Quinn's Quest for it, so you can find that, and that'll give you a little bit of a tease of some of the visuals, as well as Quinn's kind of extended pitch for what this game is, why you might like it, and why you should try it out. Each playbook, basically each character class, which represents what you bring to the team, right? You bring the heart, you bring the chill, you bring the brains, you bring the grit. Each playbook has a personal arc for the playbook, right? So the chill has the arc, caught in a plot, you overhear something, get mistaken for someone, get ushered into the wrong line, etc. You buy for 1 style. Next, you buy serendipity for 2 style. Your moment of luck continues to pay out, but also gets more complex. What does the crew think? +1 legacy. Next, in too deep for 4 trouble. You're found out, painted into a corner, caught frantically Mrs. Doubtfiring at an event, and just in way over your head, right? You get in too deep and things go really bad. +1 doom. Pick a teammate who notices that this thing has happened. And then last, resolving the arc somehow works out for 3 style. And yet you land on your feet as per effing usual. That photo becomes a meme, the money was still in your backpack, the CEO liked your initiative, etc. -1 doom, +1 legacy, +1 trait. So you get to remove that doom that you took, and you get +1 legacy, which you want, and you get a trait, which is a new special ability. Hello, Crit Hit Chronicles. Yes, we are talking game design here. Right now, I am talking about playbook-based arcs in Slugblaster, because what I'm interested in trying to do is weaving together the calling beats from Heart and the arc beats from Slugblaster to build a narrative engine for a superhero RPG where the fact, another thing that people talk about in superhero RPGs is that advancement often feels weird because superheroes don't tend to have this like linear progression of power accumulation that you would see in like a D&D or in a lot of TTRPGs that have like a fairly linear power progression arc, right? The characters start out as sort of nobodies and they face increasing challenges and become more powerful and become a bigger deal. And then by the end of the campaign, they're a really big deal. A lot of superheroes are about as big a deal 12 issues into existing as they are 100 issues into existing. There are huge exceptions, absolutely, right? There are characters who are introduced as side characters and then come back years and years later and become bigger characters. But what I don't often see is superhero games where the way that they do advancement feels really superhero-y for a lot of superheroes. And so the idea here is that if we use an advancement system and structure more like the beats arcs in Slugblaster, we might be able to convey a sense of progression and of accomplishment for players, even when the overall power level of the characters is not necessarily changing up or down by a great degree over the course of play. Right? And so here's some of my notes, and then we're just going to go on beyond these notes because these are from yesterday. So maybe you have a starting theme that comes from your class or playbook, a la Slugblaster. So we might have a playbook that is, so in Masks, there's the playbook, the Janus, right? This is the character who has a secret identity and a really strictly divided life, right? They have their mundane life and then they have their superhero life, and they try to keep those two separate. So if we had a version of the Janus in this superhero game, right, their starting theme is that duality, right, secret identity. I would then have a list of beats for a for a secret identity arc that the player and the GM, in some negotiation that I haven't decided fully, decide on using beats from those arcs. So the idea here is that we might have a menu of beats that's a little bit more like how it is in Heart, right? There's a menu of beats at different stages of a story, and then you play through those beats, right? You have an initial beat, an escalation beat, a climax, and a resolution, maybe, right? If there's 4 steps. Going through the kind of archetypal storyline, the tale type for your character, which for a Janus type character is, there is a conflict between your secret identity and your superhero identity, and you are forced to choose only one, right? You can only be present and fully active in addressing one of these challenges, right? You have a real life challenge and you have a super challenge. And then there is fallout based on the one that you didn't address. And either maybe if the arc might end with the fallout, or it might be identify the challenge, make the decision, the fallout from missing one of them, and then you do something to compensate for that fallout or to mend that wound to a certain degree, but you don't necessarily reach a good equilibrium, right? You're still reminded of how things are always going to be pulling you in 2 directions. Spider-Man has this story structure really, really often. It's probably the thing that is most strongly associated with Spider-Man as a character, is that Peter Parker has terrible luck and he's always being forced to choose, right? The Gwen Stacy, the big moment with Gwen Stacy is a place where he's choosing between a personal relationship and personal responsibility and kind of superhero responsibility. And based on the choice that he makes, there are huge implications. If somebody says, I really want this divided loyalties, you can't be everywhere at once theme as a major thing for my character, you can do that story again and again and again. You just change the characters, you change the situation, but you're hitting the same type of beats over and over and over again. And it's going to feel fresh and it's going to feel good because there's going to be resonance and kind of reincorporation over time when your character realizes that they're going to have to choose between being over here and being over there again. How are they thinking about what happened before? Are they going to make a different kind of choice now? Is their relationship with a teammate now strong enough that they can count on the teammate to handle the superhero thing while they go and handle the kind of secret identity thing? Because we're playing this as an RPG and it's a group RPG, the idea that each player character has their own arc going on and then there's a bigger plot arc gives you some flexibility and modularity where the GM can have their main plot and each player character can have the tale type that they are playing through at the moment, whether that is an arc that is to be completed every arc of the kind of meta plot, or it's a slower burn arc that gets hit less frequently, right? The superhero Peter Parker arc might be session 1, we do a superhero thing, and then we do downtime, and I introduce my unstable status quo for my Peter Parker type character, my Spider-Man type character. Oh no, I'm trying to juggle these things and I'm behind. That's beat 1, right? We have our next adventure, and during that adventure, a new threat is identified, which maybe hits my next beat of there's something big coming and it's going to take up all my attention. And then maybe another beat is, but also it's at the same time as this other thing that's important to me, who I am, not as a superhero. Now we've got that dilemma, and then you make your choice, there's fallout, and there's some kind of resolution. If the GM knows what type of arc your character is playing through, whether that is because you're always hitting your character's thematic arc from their playbook or their class, or because there's like a more modular system, and for any given arc, or when you complete an arc for your character personally, you can pick a new arc, right? So it's not necessarily Spider-Man is only ever doing the divided loyalties arc, but that's their core arc, right? It's the one that they would return to if nothing else is happening. You could have a relationship arc where it's sort of the same, but it's much more about like a romantic relationship or a friendship in specific, right? And then there's a little bit of a different guidance for telling a story of that type. And so you can have some variety. This is what lets you do things like, okay, well, this character is known for stories of this sort, but this is going to be a different one, right? There might be an arc that is, I quit, right? There's an iconic Spider-Man cover of Peter Parker walking away from frame, toward the background, and the Spider-Man suit is in a kind of aluminum trash can in the foreground, right? He gives up on being Spider-Man. So that arc might be beat 1, things are unsustainable. Beat 2, turmoil about giving up. Beat 3, I quit. Beat 4, something happens that you weren't there for and you're really guilty about it. Beat 5 is you have a conversation with somebody and you realize that you need to go back and try to be a hero, right? And then you complete the I quit to I'm back arc. That's a thing that happens again and again for characters. The idea here is to take the cyclicality of superhero stories and make it a feature, not a bug. You are letting the players be co-storytellers. It's more a writer's room kind of game, which is already exactly my kind of stuff. And it's a way of changing the mechanical and resource status quo over the course of an arc of episodes or within an episode without having kind of resource and power bloat of like, well, we're 10 sessions in and now I have 7 different superpowers. So every time it's my turn, I have to look at exactly what all of these different things do. Part of that question of bloat, I think, can be addressed by stepping back to a more narrative and fiction-driven approach of how you treat superpowers, right? In Masks, there are not really firm rules for every different type of superpower. Your choices of types of powers are set by your playbook, and then there are specific moves that are about using your powers, but they're never as granular as your laser eyes have a range of 80 feet and deal 4d6 force damage. And then when you're attacking a character who's really strong, right, they get +5 to their armor score. And so when you roll your 4d6, they're always going to take that extra 5 off of the damage that you deal, right? There's a lot of superhero games that use, here's a health pool and here's various damage dice that you roll and that kind of thing, where the focus is on some of the drama of the combat itself. My goal with this game would be that the focus is more on the broader story and the emotional thematic landscape that your character is playing through, right? You might change playbooks and then your core theme arc changes, right? If Spider-Man loses his secret identity and everybody knows that he's Spider-Man, the next arc that the Spider-Man player takes probably isn't going to be that Janice arc. It's probably going to be something else. It might be like a precarity arc of like, oh, you're having to start your life all over again, right? Because you've lost what you had. Or it might be a persecution arc where, right, you're being hunted. And by having those be a little bit more explicit for players that are interested in kind of the telling stories part of a TTRPG and are excited to be more proactive and more involved and take on more responsibility as collaborators, this I think could be a really fun way for people to engage in and enjoy some of the things that people love about superheroes that are not necessarily as well served by other TTRPGs, or maybe not as commonly served. I'm not going to try to assert that nobody has tried to address like tale type and story structure in superheroes before in TTRPGs, because it's incredibly unlikely that that's actually true. What I do think is worthwhile in investigating is this particular combination of influences, using the idea of beats as a core element in the kind of the everyday play of the game, and as a way of making lower prep GMing more viable, right? More improv, less prep. The GM doesn't need to build as many character sheets because they don't need to know that Mr. Nefario's laser eyes do 4d6 damage. Instead, Mr. Nefario exists because the persecution arc needs somebody who is leading the charge against the superhero. And we know that from the previous arc, Mr. Nefario is also a radio DJ, and in his mundane identity is like a J. Jonah Jameson type character who has already been demonizing the characters, but now public opinion has shifted and so many more people are behind them. And then doing this will let them set things up so that in their supervillain guise, they're able to accomplish something. You'll want all these things to emerge from the cast that is introduced and developed through the repetition and interchange of these different story structures, because you're probably going to get more emotional and narrative juice out of reincorporating a character than by introducing a new character. This, to me, resonates with how superhero stories work, where there are going to be new characters because sometimes you need new characters to do different things. But if you have the choice between, let's use a new character to engage with the kind of third time through the Janice arc, or let's bring back a character who was a challenge in a previous Janice arc, right? Is there going to be more emotional investment in the third time you've had to fight Dr. Nefario versus the first time that you're running into a new character that you don't necessarily know as well, you don't have as much of a history with them? And then how can we build some encouragement for the GM and the players to weave back and forth between introducing new characters and reincorporating existing characters as we go through this kind of repetition and progression of storytelling, right? The core unit of superhero storytelling, at least in certain chunks of time in the genre or the field's history, is the 5 or 6 issue arc, right? The one graphic novel size arc. Sometimes it's also like the 8 to 10 to 12 issue arc, right? It's a bigger arc. Another unit of measurement in superheroes is the run, right? The 12, 24, however many issues that this combination of artists and writers are helming and telling us a set of stories with this character or this set of characters. The end of a run often includes some amount of like retcon or soft reboot for the character, and using that kind of language of arcs and runs creates opportunities for shifting out characters, for shifting location, for kind of doing a resession 0 to reset and recalibrate what you want from the game. It lets you bring characters in and out. It lets you change locations. It lets you kind of reset a character not to 0, but closer to where they started, where emotionally they've gone through more, but their power set is still more similar, because the thing that you're seeing and the systems that you're engaging with are about that emotional journey for the character, more so than did you get enough XP that now you can buy up the power of your laser eyes from 4d6 to 5d6. Can I make this work? I don't know. I just started having this idea yesterday in terms of this particular combination of things, right? So there's some questions. Do we use hope and fear to buy these story beats, right? Hope and fear are the core meta currencies in Daggerheart. And if in a creator license system, you can just use hope and fear, right? And then that's totally fine. And there's not going to be any problems with it. Then those feel like the closest matches to the style and trouble resources, right? Where a player can buy beats with hope from their character sheet, and they can buy down the GM's fear total in order to take negative beats. How much authority and control does the player have in setting when those beats are going to happen, versus does the GM have control over when beats, like the meta plot beats happen, but player always has control over when the character arc beats happen? I don't know. I think that probably would take some testing. Right? And here is me thinking through some structure for how these beats might, right? How many beats is this going to be, right? Opening, middle, escalation, resolution, right? That's 4 beats for an arc. Maybe it's opening, right? Let's add these instead of replacing. Opening, challenge, escalation, climax, resolution. Right, so that's a 5. That's a 5 beat arc. Right, so you might have shorter arcs and longer arcs. Shorter arcs are probably cheaper to buy, but they don't have as much of a long-term impact. Longer arcs, maybe, right, you're having to spend more resources, but you're also getting to spend down more fear over time. And then maybe the resolution to one of those is bigger, right? Is there some kind of tick a clock, right? Do you have to go through your character theme arc X many times to get certain types of advancement? Right? Is completed arc the unit of XP? Right? You complete an arc and you get an advance. That might mean that you're getting an advance every 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions. That's not as much advancement as some people like, but not every game has to be for every person. And I think if there is if there is progression along the way to meta progression, is that going to be satisfying, right? Maybe that's fine, especially for people who are more on that narrative, like who are more focused on the narrative and the character relationship element. So this could get really big and hairy and involved. And I already am working on the Genre Nauts RPG. So the thing I told myself yesterday is figure out the simplest version of this, right? So that is character arcs by playbook. Each playbook has a core thematic arc, right? And so, okay, well then what are the playbooks? I have playbooks just down below. Story arc is by series playbook or playset or arc, right? The GM decides always or with the players, right? Do we get to the end of an arc and then one of the players is like, oh, I'd love to do, and then they pitch an arc, right? And they discuss with the GM. Or does the GM pitch arcs to the players like they're the bullpen or something? And the GM was like, oh, well, I was thinking of maybe doing an arc where you all get transported to a fantasy world. And that arc would be about figuring out how to get home, and then maybe one of the characters being tempted to stay. Right? Because you were thinking about wanting to do like a where do I fit kind of arc for your character next. And I think we could make that work with this kind of a thing where I can give you a place that you might be interested in fitting in, and then we'll get some tension there, right? Again, this is a more kind of open table writer's room, telegraphing what you're going to do and then making a meal of it because you know what is expected, right? It's more of a high kayfabe approach to TTRPGs, right? Everybody is in on the joke, right? There's more dramatic irony as players where you're putting the characters through story beats that you, the player, know are coming, to see how they respond in the moment, to put them through something so that they end up in a place emotionally where there can be some kind of longer term growth, right? And so we have our playbooks here. These are not exactly, but are sort of riffing on the Masks playbook, right? So there's the Inventor, Iron Man, Forge, Mr. Fantastic, Riri Williams as well, right? Because these are all guys, right? Ironheart. The Masked, right? So that's AKA the Janus. The Stalwart, right? The Flying Brick, right? This one is about expectations and responsibility. The Hunter, right? Detective arc, question mark. Community needs, question mark. Right? Well, the detective already has a detective arc, so community needs, monster of the week, right? Is the Hunter's core thematic arc a monster of the week arc, right? Okay, and in this arc, here's this monster that the Ghost Rider is going to have to deal with, right? Or here's this new vampire that Blade is going to go fight, right? The detective is more procedural detective story, mystery, murder, crime, right? This is a little bit more, right? Procedural detective feels like it gestures more toward group level plot, as do a couple of the other ones of these. So there might be some question of where do you divide between character arc and group arc? The simplest possible version of this maybe only does one of these, right? Each character has their own personal arc, and then the GM stitches those together to create the meta plot for that arc. And maybe that's one way that you do it, versus trying to figure out where you're dividing the line between a group arc and a character arc. I can imagine here is the plot structure for this arc from the GM, especially if I think across the history of Marvel and DC and a lot of the other superhero kind of narrative universes, right? Like Astro City and any number of deconstructivist and or reconstructivist or post-reconstructive superhero universes. There are these structures and these plot types that come back again and again, and not just in adaptation from one medium to the other, right? Not just in MCU doing Secret Wars versus the comics doing Secret Wars, or not just in the X-Men comic doing Days of Future Past after the comic did Days of Future Past, but the types of stories that get told, right? This is bringing a reconstructionist or platinum era superhero perspective to the genre, in understanding that things have been deconstructed and looking at and seeing the genre or the mode in terms of these structures of narrative, seeing the characters as sort of archetypal, and then not shying away from that, or not treating it as imply but not drawing attention to it. Instead, yes, drawing attention to it, so that you have more of an implicit structure for how you're going to tell these stories. Something that comes to mind is, would this game end up being great for beginner role players who are big comics fans? How would I then make it great for people who are experienced in role-playing games but are not as much superhero fans, but one or two of them are fans enough that they'll play it when somebody else in their group who is a bigger superhero fan pitches it, right? Is there enough overall cultural literacy in the structures of superhero stories that this becomes more viable in a world where the MCU has existed for 16 years at this point? 2008 is when Iron Man comes out. Theoretically, that the earlier Hulk movie is the start, but let's say that 2008 with the Iron Man, right? That players in their 20s, 30s have not necessarily grown up. They either grew up with the MCU or the MCU grew up alongside them, right? If a player that's 25, they may remember superhero stories from before the MCU got started in theaters, but they are more likely to have grown up with those being their superhero movies than somebody who's about my age who saw the Christopher Reeve Superman movies as a kid, right? Saw the X-Men movies as an adolescent and then was already an adult when the MCU got started. Does that greater level of cultural saturation make this type of more structure-oriented game more appealing, right? Does it make it so that players okay, I see how I can connect with this, right? I can wrap my hands around it and find my way into a big, messy, kind of delightfully incoherent storytelling tradition like superheroes, and be able to have fun with it. So if we're coming back to minimum viable playtest, what I could do with this is I could take the game Masks. I could run Masks, but using the meta structure of this game here, right? Where more of how you put the story together is this opaque, not transparent structure and system of interaction. But if I can build some of the structure and the interaction into, right, progression and how the mechanics work, more like how Slugblaster is interconnected with its beat systems, I think that's probably a closer early prototype version of what the game is and what the game could be. So that makes me think that I want to go a little bit farther. If I'm using the Duality Dice system, right, then I'm having to do some translation from Forged in the Dark into Duality Dice, where I can do that because I know both of those those are the two design traditions I know the best, right? Because I've been working on Daggerheart for about a year, and because I'm building a Forged in the Dark game and have mostly played and run those games over the last 8 years or whatever it is. It's Blaze in the Dark is 2017. Anyway, around that time, right? A lot of time in those traditions. Slugblaster is appealing in that it is a simplification of Forged in the Dark, right? You don't have action ratings. You don't have kind of separate attribute things for resistances. Your playbook gives you, here's a pool of bonus dice, and here's a pool of special effect. And I might be able to adjust the grit, the heart, the brains, whatever, into superhero archetypes pretty easily. And then the special gear, right, your iconic piece of gear as a Slugblaster can be your suite of powers. Maybe that's doable. I think I could probably also just build Duality Dice adjacent classes without using the Duality Dice Daggerheart damage system, right? I end up using something that's more like the conditions system in Masks, or a more simplified harm system like in Blaze in the Dark, or especially Blaze in the Dark Deep Cuts, right, where harm is easier to recover from. I think mission and downtime is a decent structure for superheroes as well. I feel like you jump back and forth between kind of downtime and mission a little bit more frequently in a lot of superhero stories, right? It's not you're more likely to get part of this issue is doing superhero stuff, and part of this issue is doing home life stuff, right? Does that mean that I adjust the structure so that each adventure, right, each quote unquote mission is much shorter, and that the play cycle, the play loop is also shorter, right? That in 2 hours you do a superhero thing and then you do a downtime thing, versus the expectation that you might do that loop in 4 hours or 6 hours or 8 hours. This again will take some play testing. All right, let's talk about our minimum viable play test. Okay. Duality Dice playbooks with a core theme, right? So I have to build those arcs. And then I need one plot arc, right? Here's the arc that the whole group is going on. Do the beats. Right? Does this create the potential for the game to stall out, right? If the dice don't go your way and there isn't a lot of hope to go around, does that mean that the plot arc stagnates? Or do the players expect that they'll need to engage with their character arc in order to get those resources? Right. So does that then mean that the character arcs give resources and the plot arcs cost resources, right? Do you get hope by going through these character beats, and then you spend hope on the plot beats, right? That you accept trouble from your character arc in order to give you the resources you need to address the plot arc? Or are these both buy and spend, right? You spend hope on your character arc, you spend hope on the plot arc. How many beats can you buy in a session, right? This controls pacing, right? If you can buy one arc from your character arc, one beat from your personal arc, and one beat from the plot arc in a session, is that each player can buy one plot beat, right? Then you could get through a whole plot in one session if you have a 4-hour session and 4 player characters and you have a 4-beat plot arc. Is that a bad thing? Or do you want it more decompressed, right? If only one plot beat can then an arc lasts X sessions, right? If you can only buy one plot beat per session total, then that arc is going to last at least as many sessions as the size of the plot, right? A 5-beat plot arc that the GM introduces is going to last at least 5 sessions. There's some incentivization and play culture of like, hey, you need to buy these beats. So there's the question of what happens if you don't buy the beats? What does the GM do with all that fear, right? What is the GM doing with overwhelming fear? In Slugblaster, right, the more trouble you have, the more it creates longer term consequences for the character. So let's look at the section on trouble as a refresher for why you would want to buy those beats so that you can buy down the trouble. So you mark trouble points throughout the run as you take dares, nope slams, etc. This is like Slugblaster stuff that has its own language that are like permutations of Force in the Dark stuff. You don't have to worry about that so much. If you mark your 8th trouble box, disaster strikes. Trouble can be cleared by spending it on beats during downtime. Disaster. The GM asks each player to make a disaster roll near the end of the run. Disaster may also automatically strike in special situations, right? So a disaster roll is sort of like a resistance roll, right? You roll 1d6 per trouble on your sheet. Take the highest. Roll 1d6 per empty trouble box on your sheet. You have 8 trouble boxes. So if you have 7 trouble, you roll 1d6, and you want high. So the less trouble you have, the more dice of these dice you get to roll to avoid trouble. On a 6, you avoid disaster and mark 1 style. On a 4-5, you avoid disaster but mark 1 trouble. I think the book hit the space bar here. That's why it jumped. Sorry. On a 1-3, disaster strikes. Something really bad happens. Mark doom. Right. So doom is a long-term resource you don't want. And page 155 for something really big and bad happens. Disasters, whether exuberant, other severe outcomes like challenges or super slams. Disasters can be the direct consequence of the current scene. Disasters could be injury, loss, like you lose your signature device. Peel back damage. Peel back pulls you home, and it's gross. Peel back accident tosses you into the multiverse, swaps you with an alternate, shifts your timeline. Capture, you're captured by the quantum cops. Personal, the last text you ever want to receive, you get dumped, your mom gets a job overseas, your dad finds your secret account, someone leaks that one video. So that scale of disaster, right? Disasters. That feels very doable with superhero stories. The thing is, there are going to be players who say, yes, bring it on. Give me the disaster. So we want a balance between inviting disaster and avoiding it by taking smaller consequences. Right, a longer-term resource you don't want, doom, disincentivizes, letting trouble add up, fear, question mark, right? So if one of the things I would need to test is how big are these resource pools, right? Does fear go up to 12? Does fear go up to 10? Does fear go up to 8 like trouble does in Slugblaster? Like, where is that balance point? Does it scale with the size of the party? What types of things introduce fear, right? Do you always get a fear on a result with fear, right? The next one of the things to do is connect the core systems with the results of plot beats, right? So hope and fear, success, failure, longer term advances, legacy equivalent. I need to make sure that I have a command over how these two elements are connected. I could run this right now because I'm a strong improv GM and I am a lifelong super fan of superhero comics, right? I could just make it all up. I will want to build at least a really basic Excel character keeper, or not Excel, Google Sheets. This is not sponsored by Google Sheets. I'm just saying that these are the tools that I use. If I had other tools, I might use them instead. I have no specific loyalty to Google. And so I can play around with this. The multi right, granular results from having the Duality Dice gives me more flexibility in GMing of yes but, yes and, no but, right? that kind of mixed results system that tends to be an engine for keeping the narrative pushing forward. Also, I could use the threat system from Deep Cuts, right? In the threat system under Deep Cuts, your character is assumed to be able to accomplish the thing, right? You can stop the train before it plummets off the tracks, but you might get knocked off the tracks yourself, right? That's a threat. Can you do this heroic thing while accounting for the threat, right? And the threat system is more closely linked to Forged in the Dark, right? Because it's for Blades in the Dark. Harper has said that they're fine with people using Deep Cuts stuff for other Forged in the Dark games, again, reinforcing the fact that mechanics can't be copyrighted. So really, if you're using your own language and you're putting your own interpretation, right, it's totally fine. There's a culture of attribution question, but like that's not something to worry about here because I would be adjusting stuff, right? And taking this and putting it in superheroes and connecting it to all these other systems is going to be fine, right? So do I prototype this in Forged in the Dark instead because the threat system feels like it really closely aligns with what a superhero story can do in terms of expecting that characters can do the big thing, but the question is, can they do it without X, right? Maybe the threat for the character trying to stop the train is, can you stop the train in time to then go do this other thing? The threat is that it takes you longer, or the threat is that it damages your super suit. And so you won't, right, you'd have some kind of penalty trying to go into the next challenge, or the threat could be that somebody on the train recognizes you, right? Like, oh, okay, these are ways that we can introduce threats that combine, that feed back into the thematic, kind of the thematic core of the game. It looks like I have to move that just so that the text is there for folks to refer to. So I could try to prototype this in Forged in the Dark, or I could prototype it in Slugblaster. But I think if I'm starting fully from Slugblaster, I would then want to do other work to take it away from Slugblaster. So it might make sense to use like not a third-party system, but to use a system that is more different than the strongest thematic design elements that I'm using, which is these beats from Slugblaster and Heart, right? It's the sense of progression from Slugblaster and the framing or the idea of a broader menu is maybe a bit more like Heart. An upside of like using stuff from Slugblaster is that Slugblaster is incredibly specific. Like it is about this kind of dimension hopping outsider, like sci-fi skateboarder, adventurer, glory-seeking kids having coming-of-age stories. Superheroes has some overlap with that, but it has a huge amount where it's not overlapping, right? And so if I design, again, back toward my thematic intention, there's going to be clear differentiation between what I'm doing and how Slugblaster works, right? And I think Slugblaster is a really cool system to do what it's trying to do. I don't know that it would do other things without needing to be adjusted, because why should it have to be able to do other things without being adjusted? I would want to make some adjustments. So I think from here, the next work that I would need to do is the kind of work that is harder for me to do while streaming, which is to just get into some brass tacks of, okay, let's make 3 or 4 playbooks with their core thematic arcs and figure out which baseline rules system we're going to use and just kind of figure it out at the table, right? Play a very rough the thing that the term that comes to mind is paper prototype, which is something you would do in video game or board game design, right? A paper prototype for an RPG doesn't, the terminology doesn't convey what I'm trying to do as much because they're already paper games, right? But it is minimum viable playtest, which is a term that I first heard from Strasha Simovic and John LaBeouf Little, right? The designers of Band of Blades and Scum and Villainy, who I've gotten to play some with a little bit, and I got to see them at Big Bad Con. So Strash and John, if you're listening, hello, y'all do good work. It was good to hang out with you. But I think that is probably going to bring me to the end of this stream. I'm very sorry about the video kind of crapping out, and I will do some editing of this, I guess, before I put it up onto the YouTube so that it's a little bit more digestible. But I'm guessing that, there maybe doesn't get as many views because I'm not on camera gesticulating and smiling. But we shall see. Thank you so much to everybody who came by to hang out and chat. So thank you to Actual Factual, to The Kids Are Asleep, to Crit Hit Chronicles, and everybody else who came through, and for folks who are watching the VODs, whether that's on Twitch or on YouTube. Let's see if this bio command is still remotely applicable. Okay. I don't remember what my commands are. It's been too long, or the bot has fallen apart. So you can find me at michaelrunderwood.com. I have a Patreon at patreon.com/michaelrunderwood. I am on socials at Mike R. Underwood, right? That's the letter R, Mike, the letter R, Underwood, no spaces, no dots, including the bad one, but I'm mostly not active on the bad one. I've moved much more of my focus to Blue Sky, but I'm also on Threads and Instagram some, and I lurk on TikTok. That, I think, is going to be all, and I will keep working on this as I have time and energy. As a freelancer and creative trying to cobble together a living, I never know exactly what's coming around the bend, so I might do another one of these later this week or next week, or I might be busy with other things. We shall see. Thank you all for hanging out with me and for listening, I guess, for listening and watching, mostly listening because I've mostly been talking because of that camera thing, but it's all good. So now I'm going to find the place where I end this stream. We're going to go to the ending thing, and then that's all going to be done. Okay, thanks.